Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the third module in our series, Making the Shift to Online Teaching and Learning. Today's focus will be on transitioning your classroom online. Some tools, tips, and tricks to get you there. We have a team of Learn presenters today, including Diane Conrad, our principal of Virtual Campus, Carrie Kuehl, online science teacher, Audrey McLaren, online math teacher, Peggy Drolette, online math teacher, Christine Truesdale, Director of Pedagogical Services at Learn, and me, Christine Thibault, Coordinator of Online Learning. In the next hour, we will briefly touch on the following topics: designing for effective online teaching, organizing for blended learning, and a day in the life, a typical day in the life of one of our online teachers, the workflow for them and their students. We're doing this in an attempt to give you the necessary tools to start or continue planning for your new reality, one which will potentially see some or all of your students learning online. So designing for effective online teaching. What does that look like? Where do I start? Where do you start? As was suggested in the very first module, a good place to start when thinking about teaching online or remote teaching or whatever you want to call it is with a model or a framework to guide you. Why this particular one, which deals with interaction? Well, that's personal as well as professional. About 20 years ago, I was on a mat leave from the Western Quebec School Board as a secondary teacher and decided to do a graduate degree in what at the time was called Distance Education and Training at Athabasca University. And I had the blessed good fortune to have Terry Anderson as one of my teachers. And Terry is a prominent scholar in the field. He was the Canadian Research Chair in Distance Learning back in the day. And this is his baby. And we talked a lot about this as senior seminar students. And the three key elements of this model hinge on the interaction engagement of learner with content, learner with learner, and learner with the educator, the teacher. And this really plays nicely with the community of inquiry framework that Dr. Labonte presented last week, to which Dr. Anderson also significantly contributed, where the key interdependent elements include social, cognitive, and teaching presence. We're not going to get too much into that, but I do just want to suggest when you're designing effective online teaching with respect to this model, and the reason I like it is because it's accessible and it's a good place to start, you need to consider how students will interact with the content as they develop knowledge and cognitive learning. How do you do this? Here's one example: teacher created videos, like the voice threads that our teachers are going to mention later on in this presentation. Content that preferably allows for responsive feedback. That's one way to think of it. You need to consider how to support and encourage student-to-student communication, peer-to-peer learning, and community building within the group. How can you do this? Well, you can use an online forum or collaborative working docs like Google. And finally, you have to take into account how you yourself can create teaching presence and a meaningful connection with your students. How do you do this? Well, you can introduce yourself with a short video. You can provide virtual office hours that are consistent and reliable. You can provide opportunities for one-on-one student conferencing. Does this look or sound familiar in any way? I hope so, because it should. Designing for effective online teaching is designing for effective teaching. And the reason I brought this up is because 85% of those of you suggested during the poll in our first module together that you were feeling ill-prepared and not terribly confident transitioning to online. But you've got this. Good teaching is good teaching. And as professional educators, you have years of experience and an arsenal of your own tools, tips, and tricks to draw from. And hopefully today, we'll provide you with some more for this particular context.
So I'm going to focus a little bit on the concept of learning design. Now, way back in 1995, when I was doing my degree in educational technology at Concordia, we used to talk about instructional design. That used to focus a lot more on the content pieces. So what is it that we were trying to teach and what were the learning objectives around the content? And now we talk a lot more about learning design, which is much more learner-centered and focused on asking the questions, what is the best way for me to design the learning environment and activities so that my student can best learn and understand the concepts and apply their knowledge and skills, not only within the context of my classroom, but out into the world as well. So this involves a lot of intentional decisions about what we're doing in the classroom, in the learning environment, structuring the content, the timing, the scope, like we're doing in a regular classroom. Because the learning may be online or in a blended mode, there are decisions that do need to be made a little bit ahead of time and not so much on the fly or as an iterative process. So starting small and then adding new tools and strategies as we go. And it also involves making decisions about which technologies best support our learning intentions. I'm going to talk a little bit about something that's been introduced by the Quebec government 2 years ago with respect to the digital action plan. So we have a digital competency framework that's been developed to help guide the kinds of decisions that we make about the use of the tools that we're going to use based on the different kinds of skills and competencies that we want students to develop. So some tools are best suited for collaboration and communication. Some tools are best suited to help support students' critical thinking skills and their problem solving. So we have to match those with our pedagogical intentions. And let's face it, this is a 12-year process. So we don't need to use all the tools and learn all the skills at once. And it's the same for teachers as well. This is a learning process over time. And like Craig is mentioning in the chat, we have a set of tools that we're developing to help support the use of technology in their classroom, whether it's in the physical classroom or online or the world outside school. So there are a lot of things you already know about good pedagogy, who your students are, what your pedagogical intentions are. So why are you doing the things that you're doing in the classroom? It's to support students' development and their learning. Today, we're going to focus a lot on the how. So how are we going to design learning activities and processes that help support student learning and transitioning that, in some cases, from the physical classroom to the online environment. And Christina is going to focus a little bit on the where and the when.
So I think this might explain some of the people who suggested that they were scared or a little bit unsure in that original, when we polled you originally at the top of the hour. Literally the gray area this coming year is the where and the when. The parts we can't nail down right now, and we may not be able to for some time. We get directives, new directives, seemingly on a daily basis. So where is this happening? At school, at home, elsewhere? A community learning center, perhaps? When? What happens during class time? Outside of class time next year? Are we talking about synchronous learning, which is basically live, either in the same physical space or not? Are we talking about asynchronous, which is offline? Could be at school, could be at home, anytime, anywhere. Are we talking about simultaneous, which is kind of a new thing? This is an interesting blend, which could be a teacher teaching in a school with students both physically present in the classroom while others are at home learning at a distance. Most likely you will be using some sort of blended model. And that's hopefully what that icon represents. What will that look like for you? What do you think it'll look like? So have a look at this. This was presented in the first module with Dr. Labonte and Dr. Canwell, and it was a continuum of blended learning, online, face-to-face, flipped hybrid, technology, no technology in terms of delivery. Where do you anticipate learning with your students in September? So I'm going to ask Carrie to unlock the tools And if people could just indicate on that continuum where they anticipate. I don't want to say being, because being is, we don't know where you're going to be, but learning with your students. So have a go at it. Let's see where people think they'll be.
And as I think we discovered earlier, if you cannot get your annotation tools to work, feel free to just type something in the chat. We'll follow you there.
For sure. It seems to be all over the place. I'm thinking there's quite a bit in the high flipped blended area towards one end and some fully online. Yeah, and that's good, could be the reality for secondary 4 and 5 teachers next year. Yeah, face-to-face in the fall with an online presence from the start. Okay.
Interesting to see so many stars in the flipped area.
Ça fait peur, oui. But it shouldn't. Thanks, Carrie. It shouldn't, because you already have all these tools at your disposal. You've had years of experience, but no matter where or when, you really don't want to have to do things twice or more. Adopting a blended model, which most of you kind of suggested that was going to be where you were heading towards, and a mindset that your new classroom is the online classroom, will help to prevent you from doubling up or tripling up on your efforts. So let's see how focusing in on the how by organizing, structuring, and moving what you do know online can help. Diane?
Thank you, Christine. And Christine, we're going to move now to getting some more feedback from you and keeping you engaged in our online environment. And we're going to move into a poll. So I'm launching the poll right now. Hopefully you can see it on the screen. You can answer as many answers as apply from the choices that you can see there. So I think actually the question might be a little bit different on the, no, how did you use your time in online meetings with students this spring? So was it teaching lessons, checking in on your students, checking in with them, social time, demos to show them how to do something that they were to work on at home, office hours, or answering some specific questions, or other? If you answer other, and I see there's 11 people who have done that out of the 55 who've already, we keep going here, that's great. If you've answered other, please write in the chat what those other things were. Okay, tutoring was your other, definitely. Hands-on learning, that's great. There are so many interesting stories of how people have done hands-on learning even though they met with their students online. So that could have been used to demo the hands-on learning. Playing Kahoot games, another great answer to that question. Watching videos, sure. Explaining how, undoubtedly, as an administrator, Mr. Koner answers, explaining how end-of-year evaluations and reporting were to be done. And kids teaching the class, some great answers here. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Thank you everybody for jumping in, and I'll share the results with you so you can see what people answered who were taking time to answer this poll. Planning alternative graduation. There have been some amazing examples that I've seen across the province. Congratulations to you on that. And rehearsing and recording script for video productions. Lots of creative ideas. I'm very impressed. Wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to poll in. Some great input there for sure. So the poll question is, one, we came up with it because our teaching team is frequently asked that question too. How do we use our live time together that we have with students? So to answer that question, we have to begin by talking about the flipped model. And I was very interested to see so many stars surrounding the flipped model. Maybe it was just one person putting multiple stars. I'm not sure. But what is the flipped classroom? The flipped classroom is a pedagogical model in which the class lessons and the homework elements of a course are reversed or flipped. So short video lessons are viewed by a student at home before the class session, while in-class time is then devoted to exercises, projects, or discussions. Having students do what would traditionally be done for homework when they are present with the teacher in class allows for those important just-in-time interventions, feedback, or answers to questions that will then help move the student forward.
Thanks, Diane. This is a list of different kinds of activities that you might want to do with your class. And you'll notice that when we use the term synchronous, just to be clear, we do mean ones that are done when we are together. So together could be online or together could be in person, either one. Asynchronous activities can be done at any time, and they allow students to move forward on their own. When you're planning, you need to think about which activities require more intervention, more guidance, more support, more interaction, and which activities students can do a bit more independently when they're gaining confidence in their own abilities. We always want to have students actively involved in order to keep them engaged. We've got that in both categories here.
So something to consider when preparing for blended learning is how classroom activities or paper resources can be transformed or enhanced with technology. You may be familiar with this model, the SAMR model, but let's quickly just review it using a worksheet as an example. So if in your class you would have used a paper worksheet or resource, using substitution, you could make your worksheet into a Word doc that students can then fill in and submit online. Augmentation, you might take the worksheet's questions and make a Google form quiz instead. And with this tool, you can build in instant feedback for students, and you as the teacher will see the results much more quickly. Moving into the transformation phase, maybe you would, as an alternative form of assessment, ask the students to write an essay that could be then shared with peer editors and teachers for online feedback. Then the student could record the essay to be shared with a wider audience. You could redefine the task completely by having a class asked to create a documentary video answering essential questions related to the concept. Teams of students could take on different subtopics and collaborate to create one final product. This assignment would allow them to deepen their knowledge as they would be expected to use outside sources for information. Googling would be encouraged. But this is very important to note. When you look at this scale, there is no need to hit M, R, or even A every time. Sometimes S, or substitution, is all that is required. As Christine mentioned earlier, you need to consider which tool to use for which purpose.
Let's try again with the mic on. At Learn, we use an LMS, or a learning management system, called Sakai. It's a web-based tool that allows us to structure and organize our online courses. It has a place for resources, it has a calendar, it has, you can arrange learning modules in it. It's a very powerful tool. While these sorts of tools can help you organize your online materials, they are by no means necessary. Here are some examples of tools that you could use that would allow your students to access materials from home, that are a lot simpler than using something like an LMS. The simplest option that I could think of would be creating a Google Doc or a Word document and putting hyperlinks to your required materials in it. You could structure it to show weekly or daily plans. In the past, I've used a class blog to share weekly plans, links to lessons, calendar with deadlines and important dates. The example is what you see on the screen on the left side there. Google Sites or other similar tools have very straightforward, very easy to use simple interfaces for building websites, and they could be used in a similar manner. Using something like Google Classroom would be sort of a step up a little bit in that it is made for educators and has some added functionality for submitting assignments and collecting grades. But there are a lot of options. You can start wherever makes sense. Many tools can be used for different kinds of activities. When you're choosing a tool, you need to consider the pedagogical intent, like Christine was saying earlier. Is your activity intended to be done synchronously or asynchronously? Are you looking for two-way communication between a teacher and student to facilitate feedback? Does it allow for students to communicate with each other? Would you prefer that student responses be viewed only by the teacher or by peers as well? Those are some of the things that you can think of. On the slide, you can see these are some examples of tools that we have used for reflection in the past. You can see Padlet could be used synchronously or asynchronously. The other tools that tend to be more of an asynchronous type of model. In terms of student-teacher communication, Padlet has more two-way feedback, whereas Google Form is something you could easily use to gather information from the student, but communicating backwards, that feedback loop isn't really built in. You can also see that Seesaw allows for students to communicate with each other and offer feedback to one another. So depending on the task that you're looking for, you could choose a different tool. It's no secret that flexibility is an important skill to have in order to be able to manage a group of learners at any age. When you're designing or redesigning material for next year, here are some suggestions to make things more portable and adaptable to the online environment. Recording lessons, we've heard a little bit about flipped class today. Recording lessons is one thing you may consider if you decide to flip your classes next year. Some of the benefits of that is that you can reuse them for multiple groups. So think record it once, but share it with each group of students that needs to see that. It can also be a time saver for future you if you end up teaching the course again. You've got this, you could reuse bits of it or the entire thing depending on the situation. So year to year, there could be some savings. The recorded lessons are also available if you post them somewhere for students to watch a second or a third time if needed. Think about all those students who need to see or hear things again and again, and then all of a sudden it'll click for them. Sometimes they need that. They have a little bit more control, students do, over the video lessons as well, because they can pace themselves. If they need to pause and write some notes, they can. If they need to, well, you know what, I didn't quite hear that. Let me rewind 5 seconds and hear it again. They can do that. And they can also revisit those lessons when they're reviewing for an evaluation later on. We have many tips for recorded lessons, but I'm only going to share 3 with you today. I think these are the most important. Keep them short. For elementary students, maybe a maximum of 2 minutes is the appropriate length for a video lesson. Whereas for upper secondary students, maybe you could keep their attention for about 20 minutes maximum. But you know your students, you're going to have to adjust things accordingly. Share the lessons somewhere so they can be available 24/7. It's great for managing students that are in different locations. Think about students at home versus students at school. Or if you have students that are absent and need to catch up, this is another tool that they could use. Most importantly, though, go easy on yourself. Remember, this is a work in progress. Aaron Sams, one of the pioneers of the flipped class model, had a great saying. I love this. Do you need it perfect or do you need it Tuesday? Tuesday always wins. Consider how accessible the materials are to special needs students. For example, Google has some built-in tools that can help students to read materials if that's something they struggle with. If you're giving feedback, think about creating an audio or a visual capsule instead. There are links in the educator's toolbox on assistive technology that can be helpful to you. Check it out later. And the last thing I'll say about flexibility, while we love to hear our own voices, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Use what's already available. There are many resources on the Learn site. There are how-tos, subject-specific resources, and the focus tools are there. Those are some that come to mind. And also think about tools that you can reuse. If you know, for example, that you do a lot of comparing and contrasting in your course, and you create a graphic organizer to help you with that, you can use that again and again for multiple activities, regardless of the content. This is a time when teachers really need to rely on each other, even more than before. As much as possible, we should try to share or co-create or reuse resources, activities, and lessons. Not only does it spread out the development load, but it allows us to learn from each other. In Sec 5 Chemistry, one of the courses that I teach, I start the year by reviewing key concepts from the Sec 4 Science course. So I'm able to reuse chunks of material from my Sec 4 course when I do this. If you're a grade 2 teacher, think about collaborating with the grade 1 and grade 3 teachers at your school. Can you use grade 1 chunks of content to help you personalize and address the individual needs of your students? Maybe a few of your students need to revisit the grade 1 material. Maybe all of your students need to revisit the grade 1 material. Share some sections of your course with the grade 3 teachers as well to help them with their scaffolding. Something to think about as we go forward.
So this is it. The million-dollar question. This question comes up over and over. How do you evaluate students in an online environment? When thinking about evaluation, there are a few things to keep in mind. Don't ask questions that just require Google or a calculator to answer. Students should need to apply their learning or deepen their knowledge as part of the evaluation. If you want to use more traditional tests, which we do definitely too, allow for timed tests and quizzes that require students to show their work and possibly include reflection also as part of the evaluation. Projects and presentations, of course, are always a great alternative to tests. Because you make meaningful connections with your students, you will know if their evaluation results don't line up with what you have seen in-class interactions. Your teacher spidey senses will tingle. Don't worry, you will get to know your students even if they are online with you only. So it's time for us to just take a break and a breath and send it over to you again, because there have been some amazing ideas I've been seeing rolling through the chat, some great tool sharing as well. But the question we're going to pose to you now is, how are you going to make the most of your time in live classes, either face-to-face or at a distance, with your students in the fall? So we'd love to hear some ideas from you in the chat about the use of the live time with students. And there have been also some notes that have been coming into the chat about the amount of time that is ideal for students at different grade levels. And there's been some input from teachers. And all this chat will be as well shared curated first and then shared with you in the educator's toolbox. And Dr. Canuel has shared an article there that will also be shared there, but you can check it out from We Are Teachers. And there's still discussion going on about how long it's ideal for elementary versus secondary students to be online. But I see also an answer. How are you going to make the most of your time in live classes? Supporting students socially, emotionally. Great. Interactive lessons. Problems that take the factual knowledge and apply it. Exactly what we were talking about in that million-dollar question about evaluation. Thank you. Interactive activities. That's a great point Trish makes about setting up the procedures. That is going to be a big part of the time that you're going to first spend with students face to face. Building relationships, 100%, absolutely. Ideally getting the students to drive the agenda. Good answer, I love these. Thank you, so many great ideas. Thinking more about the access to technology and the flipped model, great. I'm glad that that's something people are moving forward to. Discussion to get to know them. Thank you so much for your input. We'll continue to read them as they come in, and we'll move on to the next section and get more practical with Audrey and Peggy.
Thanks, Diane. So many people have asked us what our typical day is like. What's a day in the life for an online teacher? And figuring that out was really challenging because just like the brick and mortar teacher, there is no such thing as a typical day. No 2 days are the same. But the closest we could get was to talk about a daily workflow and something that we call learning cycles. So we do have a semi-regular daily routine for our workflow, and these tasks are probably look very familiar. What you're looking at, the early morning and the afternoon, that's Audrey. That's not necessarily the same even as any of the other online teachers here, but I tend to do my prep early in the morning before class starts, before my first class starts, because the closer I get to actual class time and the less time there is left, that's when I get all my best ideas at the least convenient time. And that's when I have the clearest vision for you know, what it is I actually want to achieve. So a large part of my planning is early in the morning, and then my classes happen when they happen, just like you folks. And then hopefully at some point in the afternoon, I'll have a chunk of time where I can do things like corrections or tutoring and things like that. So that's pretty much, you know, as typical as it gets for workflow. But now I want to describe for you a learning cycle. And I'm going to give you an example. Again, it's an Audrey example for a certain type of student that we call our real-time students. Those are the students that we see in a live class every day. And then when I'm finished, Peggy is going to give you an example of a learning cycle for our for another type of student. This cycle that you're looking at the top, the asynchronous and then the synchronous and then asynchronous again, this isn't a day. This is probably more like 2 or 3 days in length. And it doesn't always start at the top, and it doesn't always involve a voice thread or a Desmos activity, but because remember, as Carrie mentioned before, it's very advisable to have different types of activities that you can reuse and move around. But this happens often in my learning cycle. So before the live class starts, my students will watch a voice thread, and that happens to be the tool that we use to record our lessons. So it's a voice thread that I will have made, and they've watched it before the live class starts. Just so you know what a voice thread looks like, this is what the kids would see. I give them a link and they go to the website, and they'll see a series of PowerPoint slides. Again, I've made the slides, and I've added my voice to the slides. So it's just like me teaching a lesson in class. And my voice will either be explaining what's happening on the slide, or I'll be prompting them to answer a question or ask a question or make some kind of a comment or reply to my prompt. So that's what happens outside of class. So now we're moving into the live class portion. This is the synchronous part. The first thing that happens the next day in class is we process the voice thread. So I group their comments so that I can start a conversation happening. On the left-hand side, you see a bunch of students' answers to a prompt that I had in the voice thread. And they have, all the ones on the left have all answered it correctly, but they haven't gone into any depth in their answer. And that's fine. On the right-hand side, though, I collected a few comments from students that I really want to use to start to continue a discussion going in class. And I'll select these types of comments because, for example, in Alexia's comment, there's gold to mine in that. She's making a very interesting point that I might want to talk about. Megan has asked an interesting question that nobody else asked, and I want the whole class to talk about it. And Katie has actually made a little mistake in her answer. I want to address that as well. So this is where the asynchronous and the synchronous are blending with each other, and each part informs the next. And this makes the class, the live time, quite student driven. It also improves engagement because it's like the kids have already started a conversation before they've even come to class, and we're just continuing it now in the live class. The next part of the live class, in this example, I would do a Desmos activity. So we're still in the same class. We finished talking about the voice thread, and now I want them to do something, do an activity like this. By the way, Desmos activities are not only for math, they're not only for high school. A Desmos activity is a series of screens, again, that either the teacher can create or you can use someone else's. You can see thumbnails of those screens across the top of this screen. So like I said, you can either make your own or use someone else's and customize it. It's all free for everyone, teachers and students. And it's a place where you and all your students, whether they're in the classroom with you or sitting at home, you can all gather in one spot at the same time. And from the teacher dashboard, which is what you're looking at here, you can see on the left, I see all the names of my students. So I know who's in the classroom in the Desmos activity with me, and I also know where they are in the activity. I can see, for example, that Apollonius is already zooming ahead to the third screen here. And by the way, I'm using a Desmos anonymizer here to protect my students' privacy. That's why it looks like I have Apollonius and Blaise Pascal in my classroom. I showed this example of Desmos because on Monday's webinar, many people were asking about what are some good ways of engaging and managing all of that engagement. So Desmos is great for that. You can see large groups at a glance. And on this side, you can see, now I can see how the whole class is doing on one particular screen. Before I could see all the screens, now I can just see one particular screen, and I can see that, okay, it looks like everybody's points are lining up. Everybody seems to be getting it, except maybe, again, that Blaise Pascal. I can zoom in and see what he's doing, just him, and I can give him some feedback. So how would you use Desmos activities in another subject area and level, you might be wondering? Well, Desmos, this activity admittedly is very mathy. I'm a math teacher, but Desmos has all kinds of other types of built-in activities that can be used for any topic, like a card sort, which is like a matching activity. There's a sketch tool, there's ordered lists, multiple choice questions, and all of them you would see displayed from the teacher dashboard in the same way, either the whole class, all the slides, the whole class, one slide, or just one student. And you can really get them actively engaged, and you can manage it all at the same time. So we're still in class, the activity is over, let's say. And if there's still time in class, I'll get them working on some type of an assignment, and it might be a short-term or long-term, formative, summative. It might be something on paper, or it might be something digital like a GeoGebra. It might be something they're correcting themselves. It might be something peer-reviewed, or maybe they're just handing it in for me to correct. But important to note that this part of the cycle might be the longest part. It might take 2 or 3 days, because I certainly don't give them a voice thread every single night. Usually at the most, it's 2 recorded lessons per week, maybe 3. So that's my learning cycle. Now I'll turn it over to Peggy, who's going to show you her learning cycle.
Thank you, Audrey. So I'm going to describe for you the learning cycle for a student who is a self-paced student. Because of scheduling constraints in our schools, not all students can attend our real-time classes. That is a Monday to Friday schedule and during the same time slot. Because of those constraints, we have a self-paced program. These self-paced students access their online course of study through our learning portal, Sakai, which allows them to move through the curriculum independently with guided pacing and the support of a teacher who monitors regularly and communicates with them on a regular basis. This model might be of interest for you if you're a Cycle 2 high school teacher. If you will be providing in the fall a combination of a face-to-face online, a face-to-face and an online learning resources in the fall. In a self-paced program, the learning cycle is different. Meanwhile, the content delivery still happens in a voice thread where students are active and can collaborate with other students. But the practice activities are done asynchronously with activities provided where I can monitor and provide feedback. And that's what's important for us, is that we can monitor their progress and we can provide feedback. Then once a week, sometimes twice a week, for 30 minutes in Zoom, I meet with my individual students, or it could be a small group of students where their questions, comments, or concerns are addressed. We talked about voice threads. If you look on the board here, the cycle of a self-paced student will begin with a voice thread, and this is where the subject matter is delivered, like I described a while ago. Audrey described the power of student engagement in a voice thread, and that's why we adore this tool. What I'd like to point out now, though, is how simple it is to tweak our voice threads. I reuse these from year to year, whether my audience is a real-time student or a self-paced student. I like to personalize the first 2 slides for them. First, well, my face changes. I want to use my webcam to show the present me. And the second slide is usually a reminder, please don't skip any of these steps. These advanced organizers can be customized and adapted easily from year to year. I must point out, and someone mentioned that in the chat, they wanted to know if there was a fee to VoiceThread. Yes, there is a cost to obtaining a VoiceThread license, but there are other options available to you. And I noticed someone in the chat mentioned Edpuzzle, where students can collaborate in that as well. My final words in a voice thread will be different for my self-paced students. I always create a check for understanding slide at the end. I call these FAIL, first attempt in learning. This is usually a quick problem for the students to work on. This could be sent to me in different ways. It could be a Google form, it could be sent to me through email, it could be a quiz, but a favorite among students is to do their work using pencil and paper, taken a picture of their work, and send it to me through a direct message on Twitter, which is a safe environment for me to provide feedback. If your learners are younger, they can make their thinking visible through possibly Class Dojo or Seesaw. And my last slide in a voice thread will remind my self-paced students what their next steps are in their learning cycle. Even if I will not meet my students in a live session immediately after the voice thread lesson, I can easily monitor my students' progress and provide feedback. The next step in the learning cycle is to allow students to grow. Audrey mentioned Desmos. I'd like to talk about Class Kicks. Here is a place that students can grow, they can question, and they can inquire. If you're looking for an online learning design that involves engagement and interaction between students, teacher, and content, ClassKick is the tool for you. We just learned about ClassKick this year, and all the teachers at Learn have fallen in love with this. Preparing for a ClassKick activity is quite simple. You can upload your own content, or you can create something new with drawings, text, images, audio, links, and videos. By editing, you customize. Whether your intention is to provide for a synchronous environment or an asynchronous setting, your students can do activities by drawing on the board, adding text or images. They can fill in the blank. There are multiple choice options and a lot more. At this moment, ClassKick is offering Pro Access, which provides for you, the teacher, an unlimited amount of activities. This is provided to educators until October because of COVID. And this is where the magic happens. This is the view I get when I want to monitor my students' progress, whether it's for my real-time students or my self-paced students. Student thinking is visible. I can see who needs help, or I can see who gets a high five. I can provide audio feedback, which is really cool, or I can place a cool sticker. A student can raise their hand to get my attention, or they can ask for help from their peers. And this magic can happen at any time, whether I'm with the students live or if they do this at their own pace. The synchronous part of the self-paced learning cycle happens during our weekly, sometimes bi-weekly meetings. Prior to this 30-minute meeting, usually it lasts about 30 minutes, the role of a self-paced student is to access the voice threads and the activities that follow. And they do this on their own time. While they interact with the content and the lessons, they must document their process. Then there is one-on-one or small group meetings. To create an efficient meeting, I guide my students. These meetings require preparation on their part. In a Google Doc, I prepare an agenda and I share this with students prior to our meeting. This provides an opportunity for students to ask their questions before our meeting, and it gives me a heads up as well. I kick off our one-on-one meeting by discussing housekeeping items, such as reminders of forum topics, or it could be changes in our individual schedules. Then the rest of their meeting is their time to ask questions. Now, we all know if we ask a student, do you have any questions? What is their answer going to be? Not at the moment, or no, I don't have any questions. Then I'm ready. What I could do is ask them to walk me through a sample problem on the board. We end the meeting with next steps in the learning cycle. The assignments are the same whether the students are in a real-time setting or a self-paced environment. In a self-paced model, a student must be autonomous and work on their assignments independently. My role is to encourage them to communicate with me so that they can move forward in the learning cycle. The self-pace requires greater independence on the student part because they do not get those daily reminders like the real-time model.
So it's Peggy and I and Carrie, we've kind of shown you a lot of tools, and it's impossible to show you all the tools. Your heads would explode, and we don't know them anyway. And it's impossible to show you all the different ways to use all the tools. So instead, we've organized our favorites into a table. We're kind of calling it the mega table now. According to the pedagogical intention. So on the left-hand column, you'll see content delivery, digital worksheet, collaboration. Those are the pedagogical uses for the tool. And then the next column is the tool. Again, you can use these tools for anything, but this is how we tend to use them. But the table also indicates each tool's features, like features that people have asked about here today, like is it free? What kind of communication tools are embedded within it? So it's a work in progress, and we thought that you might find it useful.
So we'd like to hear, I thought my my microphone was off. I had to double check. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Could you please answer this? What is one of your go-to class activities that you'd love to transition online? Book clubs, great idea. A thought, a message of the day. Love that idea. And students love using quotes also to, especially when they're reflecting in their learning. Gallery walks, great idea. Speed dating books. Oh, that's interesting. I just want to point out, someone was asking me about Class Kick and how would that work with peer collaboration. There is also an option that students can work in groups in Class Kick. What it requires when they sign in is they have to use the exact same name, and then 2, 3, or as many students as they want can work on the same slide together. And that could be in an synchronous or an asynchronous environment. Great ideas. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. And thank you to today's presenters. Please check out educatorstoolbox.learnquebec.ca, where the recordings for all of the sessions in this series, as well as many complimentary resources, all that have been mentioned, plus the ones that you have added to the conversation. All of those will be added, and it will be a growing site thanks to what you have brought to the table, as well as all of the ideas from our presenters. Rest assured that all of your questions as well, the ones that you've asked in the Google Doc that was shared with you or in chat, will be addressed in the shared Google Doc as part of this session. I want to wish you a safe and relaxing summer on behalf of all of us at Learn, and we'll see you in the fall. Thank you so much for joining us.